Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Master's Apprentice. We have been talking about difficult teachings of Jesus because they are difficult. They might seem simple in the sense of what they're saying, but living them out, that's an entirely different story. But instead of just thinking, oh man, that's hard, that's difficult, we need to wrestle with these, pray over these things, and in the power of the Spirit, hopefully live out these things as apprentices of Jesus and in light of God's kingdom. So, Dustin.
Yeah, it's another
What are
tough
we
one
looking at?
today. Last week we talked about loving your enemies, which was pretty difficult. This one is difficult in a different way. This is going to be about retaliation and how our response should be in the face of evil when evil is done to us. So I think you've got the scripture there for us, Matthew chapter
Yes.
5. Yeah, this is Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 38. It says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." So, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Like, that's something that's just natural for us. If someone does something to us, we are wronged in some way. Justice must be done, and they must pay for what they've done. And so Jesus gives 3 specific examples, and then the last one we'll definitely touch on. But the 3 specific examples he gives are very much based in their culture and context. So we'll talk about it. However, I think there can be a misconception when it comes to this passage, especially the turning the other cheek part. And at face value, it just seems that Jesus is saying, let people beat up on you and just take advantage of you, right?
Right.
If someone literally just knocks you in the face, you're just like, okay, and you just take it and you just turn the other cheek. So that's not really what's going on here, though, right? You would agree?
Yes,
Okay.
I would agree.
Because some people will take this and just use this to say that Jesus was basically teaching us to just let things happen and not to stand up or use any kind of violence. Of course, they miss the whole part about Jesus in the temple and throwing out the money changers.
Yeah.
So with this retaliation, let's just jump into the examples and kind of walk through them. You've got the first part of turning the other cheek. And if you'll notice specifically, it says if someone hits you on the right cheek, it actually calls out the cheek placement, if you will. And the reason that was significant is, people will see this as more violence, and this is actually more insult based, if you will. Back in those times, if you were of equal class and someone were to slap you as an insult, they would take their right hand and they would slap, and they'd come across their body, and it would actually hit the person's left cheek. So they would slap them, and they would do that to people of equal class. But as we know, Romans saw Jews as beneath them. And so if ever they were to slap them, they would not give them the dignity of a slap across. They would a backhand slap.
Oh, gotcha.
So it would end up hitting the Jews' right cheek because it was a backhanded slap. And so this wasn't a thing about violence so much as it was a statement of, you are beneath me, and insulting this person with the slap. And obviously the Jews could not retaliate at that point in time because there would have been some consequences there. But they couldn't just turn around and slap the Roman. But Jesus gives this, what probably happened quite often, example. If someone is standing there and they give you this backhand slap across the cheek, your response should not be one of like anger or wanting to get them back. It should just be to turn the other cheek. Now, I kind of looked into this. I mean, there's people who would say that Jesus is telling us to make them recognize you as an equal because you're turning one cheek. I don't want to get into the weeds on all of that, but
interesting.
But the point of this is, he is saying, if someone is giving you this backhanded, like, I just lost the word. If they're giving you like this backhanded slap and insulting you, your response should be just to turn the other cheek. There should be no retaliation. There should be no seeking out any kind of retribution. You stand there and you take it. And I don't know what the common response to that was from being slapped, but that response was countercultural to what the norm was.
Right.
Because he's telling you this is what you should do instead. Right. And I just, taking that, just this one example at face value, I mean, it's not fun to have people insult you or count you as like less than, right? Because we want to come back and, prove that we are better, or that we want to kind of justify who we are. And Jesus here is saying, if you're going to be part of my kingdom, there's people who are going to insult you. There are people who are going to look at you and think that you're less than, and there should be no retaliation on your part. There should be no, in our context, there should be no spewing back at them. Well, if you think I'm this, then you're this, right? There should be no like getting back at, right? I know I'm kind of doing all the talking here, but any thoughts on that?
You're doing great, Dustin. I'm just soaking up what you're laying down here. But I'll just say that in our culture, right, if we're understanding this to be like a way of insulting someone or showing that you're upset with them in a derogatory kind of way, that for us, I'll give a really simple example in our culture. It would be like someone giving you the middle finger. Right. And so, it'd be like, no, don't give them the middle finger back.
Right.
Just, basically let them insult you. Like, is my understanding, right, of coming on here, that the turning the other cheek is like, let them go ahead and put both hands up if they want. But don't you retaliate and do the same treatment to them. That would be like a kind of a cultural idea with that. But as far as like a visual or physical way of doing it, in the same way that someone might use their words to degrade you or insult you in light of a certain situation. And that as a follower of Christ or as being part of his kingdom, it's like if you don't retaliate in that way. So what I would argue, I'll just say this: it's not that you can't stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not that you can't be like, why are you calling me that, or why are you saying that? I don't think that's the point being made. The point being made is that you don't do it back. So someone calls you a derogatory term or says something hateful to you as an insult, you don't return it with an insult that is equal to the same. Um, you just
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not repaying evil for evil. Because, I mean, right at the top, he's like, an eye for an
Right.
eye, a tooth for a tooth. You did this to me,
Right.
I do this to you.
Yep.
And Jesus is saying the response should not be getting back.
Right.
The response should not be blow for blow, right?
Now
Just,
you know
yeah,
how it
you hit me.
feels.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The next example that he gives is this whole if you're sued, like giving not just a tunic, but a cloak. Um,
Mm,
and what's at, and we could get into the weeds on all of this, but essentially back then, I mean, clothing, nice clothing especially, was of value. I mean, we see quite often in scripture where like there's lost cast for garments. Jesus himself, like what he was wearing, there was lots cast for his garments.
mm-hmm.
So like you couldn't go to your local Walmart or Goodwill to go and get some clothing. It was hard to come by, and it was very valuable. And so Jews, especially in this culture, they were not rich by any means. Only Jews that were rich were tax collectors. And
Mm-hmm.
so what they had, if there was some kind of lawsuit brought against them, was their clothing. And Jesus is saying here, if you're in a scenario in which someone is trying to sue you, whether rightfully or the way it's indicated feels like wrongfully, right?
Right.
If there's something brought up against you and you wanting to fight it, instead of just reluctantly, it's like, here's the cloak, go the extra mile and give
Mm,
him the tunic, which actually was considered a um uh, uh like a cloak was like an outer garment and the tunic was like an inner garment. So it has
mm,
this picture of like giving all of your clothing to the
mm,
point like you have no clothes. Like
mm,
you're going like above and beyond of like, here's not just my like outer garment, here's my inner garment as well. Like, so you're
mm.
going above and beyond to make the situation right. So you have this scenario of
Wow.
someone trying to sue you and wrongfully, more than likely, you're, instead of retaliating and trying to fight, you're just saying, okay, to make the situation good, I'm going above and beyond. I'm not only giving what you asked for, I'm just going above and giving you more and taking that on just to make sure that everything's right between us.
Mm,
So all of these have a little bit of nuance to them, but they're all still
right.
communicating this same idea of we're not to
It
repay evil for evil.
right. So it's, and correct me if I'm wrong. This one is carrying the idea of like going above and beyond to settle with somebody, even if they're your enemy,
Yeah.
even if they're wrongfully suing you. Go out of your way to settle it.
Yeah. Make
Even
peace, essentially,
yeah.
right?
Which
Yeah.
wow, that is that one is brutal.
Yes, it is. Yes,
I
it is.
mean, someone cussing you and you not cussing them back is one thing. Someone insulting you, you not insulting back, another thing. But now you're talking about personal property and like, um,
Right.
and um, and what do you do in that situation? And like you said, there is lots of nuance to that. And trying to
Yeah.
figure out what this exactly would mean in our culture
Our
is
context.
really,
Yeah.
I think, is probably hard. And I want you to speak a little more on this if you can, because I don't know that the exact situation that he's describing really exists in our culture
Yeah.
of what he's exactly describing here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we were to like do an apples to apples conversation, I mean, money is the what we have of value, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
that's really like clothing is not that big of a deal anymore.
Right.
I mean, if we were to like take this at just face value, it would be if someone says, "Hey, you did this to me and I lost out on X, Y, and Z, you would owe me something," and they actually sue you and take you to court. I mean, the exact argument would be making sure that it's settled and even going above and beyond. But I think in just everyday interactions, it's if someone is looking to you and saying that you have done X to me and you have hurt me, and maybe they're not entirely truthful, or maybe they just don't see it correctly, you're still going out of your way, and instead of giving them the exact amount they're asking for, you go above and beyond to make sure that everything has been settled.
Wow.
And everything is at peace between you and them. Because if someone is saying you owe me this and you give them above and beyond, what are they going to do back? Right.
Right.
They're like, oh, well, I was just asking for this and you've done this. Right. That's a big statement. And that looks way different.
By implication, is it also implying don't sue them back?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Like a countersuit or like
right.
Whatever. It's just settle the issue. Like, don't create more drama here. Don't treat them the way that they've treated you in light of this lawsuit. And so in that sense, it is categorically the same.
Yeah.
So someone insults you, don't insult them back. If someone sues you, find a way to settle that and go beyond that in making it right with them, and don't sue them back. Like, don't sue them the way that they've sued you. Wow. This is getting progressively more difficult in the implications of this teaching. And once again, we've got to wrestle with it, but not for the point of just wrestling with it. It's kind of like, how do I apply this principle? And I want to be faithful to applying it correctly, and not just, that's hard, and move on from it. Like, we've got to wrestle with it, see how that principle applies in our life.
Definitely, because there's a lot of nuance to this. We're taking something that was used in that context and trying to apply it to ours that looks totally different. Right. How does this look as a follower of Jesus? And part of that is going to be prayer, and then part of that is kind of living it out, right? It's taking, when situations come up, just saying, God, is this where I should turn the other cheek? Is this where I should go above and beyond, right? So yeah, it's definitely something we'd have to wrestle with, but it's something we should wrestle with and work through.
So he continues. There's more layers to this, isn't there?
There is. So the last part, well, I shouldn't say the last part, because the very last part is different. This next one says that if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. I think out of all of these, this one tends to be the one that most people kind of talk through. The extra mile, if you will. You hear that quite often. What happened in this? What?
Sorry, triggered a memory. But it's all good. Yeah. We'll just move on.
Another podcast episode.
Yeah. we'll move on.
At this point in time, there was a law that was in place that the Romans could impose upon the Jews, that if you were, I believe it was 12 years old and up as a Jew, if a Roman soldier came across you and they had their pack, if you will, that they had loaded onto their horse, at any point, if they looked at you and said, "Hey, carry this," you were entitled to have to carry it for 1 mile. And the Romans could do this at any point in time, and they could just look at you and say, "Hey, carry my pack," and you had to, for the law. And so Jesus uses this example. I mean, you can imagine. I mean, just whether you're busy or you're going somewhere or you've got work to do, and someone just comes over and says, "Hey, carry this for me." You have to drop everything you're doing and you have to go do it.
Hmm.
And Jesus is saying, yeah, if someone tells you to go 1 mile, don't drop the pack at a mile, offer to go 2. And can you imagine? Can you imagine what that would do to like the Roman asking you to do that? I mean, probably done it quite often in their life, just asking random people to just
Right.
carry my pack for a mile. And then you turn around and say, yeah, I can go 2.
Mm-hmm.
How countercultural that would be.
It is carrying a similar connotation as the being sued one is like, you don't just give them the tunic, give them the cloak. And in this case, it's like, don't just go with them 1 mile, let's go with them 2. He's hammering home this point of, let me give you another scenario. If it's not possessions, how about time? Even though there's a sense in which this is unjust and wrong for them to basically use them as mules or as free labor.
Yeah.
They're like, offer them double. Like, offer to go ahead. I'll go with you another one.
Right.
Wow. I'm just thinking in that cultural moment of how hard that would have had to hit, of like, especially those that thought of Jesus as someone to rescue them from the Roman Empire, and him saying, oh, don't refuse the 1 mile, go with them too. But once again, this is all the context of don't retaliate.
And you're picking up on the theme, and technically every single example is giving this idea, because even in the insult, it's saying turn the other cheek. You're giving another opportunity.
Yeah, go ahead.
So like,
insult me again.
all of these examples are giving this idea of a giving above and beyond, not in evil, but in actually, like, dare I say, good. Like, instead of repaying an evil for an evil, you go above and beyond with good intentions. You are, if they insult you, you're not going to retaliate, and you even stand there, and if they're going to do it again, you give them the freedom to do it again. If someone is suing you and taking stuff, make sure that you go above and beyond to give them what's needed in order to settle. If someone comes and just asks you to carry this pack, you go above and beyond, and you give more. You go further. So it's like, all like leading up to this like generosity kind of feel to it, of like giving good and repaying evil with good. Right.
So man, I get it in the context. Is it difficult to find an apples to apples for our current day of what that would mean, going, as you said, the extra mile? What would be the cultural context for us? I don't know. Like, is there an apples to apples or similar thing?
I think this one can be a little more tough, because I don't know if we have, because this gives the idea of an enemy,
Right?
someone who's against you and you're doing this for. We tend to X out a lot of people who we X out a lot of people in our lives who we don't get along with, or like are semi enemies, right? Kind of like we talked about last week. It's hard to say that we really have enemies, but even in the loosest sense, it's tough to come up with an example right now, that I can really think of, just because it's something that I don't think we have a lot of interaction with.
Right. We don't have police officers walking up to us and saying, "Hey, carry this for me for a mile."
Right.
I'm trying to like, we don't have any like officials. I said police officers as an example. We don't have like any like government officials or military people in our context. And then the law in which we live in requiring us to do that. Like
Yeah.
we don't like, I don't, I'm sure there's places where maybe this could hit home a little more relevant than to our culture and where we're
Yeah.
at. The principle still applies and it's similar to all the other principles, but as far as trying to find, I don't know that we have one currently in our culture that would be a fair comparison to what they went through with this concept. But but once again, it's kind of interesting. It's almost what's being implied is that even if someone is unjustly using your labor in this case, it's show kindness.
Yeah.
It's, I shouldn't be made to do this, Mile, but I'll help you out more than that. And that's the same thing with the suing one. It's like, I don't know that I really owe you this, but however this ends up settling, I'll make sure that this is taken care of and go above if necessary. Like, and so, wow, it's the same thing over and over and over again. And I have to say, this is not making this teaching any easier. The deeper you go, the more like, it's like thinking of like a nail in wood. And Jesus is like,
Yeah.
you've heard eye for eye, tooth for tooth. I say, turn the cheek. I say, give him your cloak and your tunic. I say, go another. And like every time he hits the nail, it's like, okay, this is getting deeper and more difficult of a teaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which leads us into technically the last one.
It does. And I will say up front that though I've kind of looked through this, I haven't quite connected all the dots, but I know they're all connected.
Yeah.
Because they're all together.
Mm-hmm.
And so this last one, so Jesus gives this idea of going above and beyond, right? Being generous to those who are doing evil, being good to those who insult you, making sure you go above and beyond to settle. He's like going through all of this, and then he gets to the end and he says, give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you.
Well, so I just pulled something up. I was looking at some different commentary notes on this specific verse and in relation. And someone, once again, I haven't dove into this specifically, but someone has pointed out the way that it connects, Dustin, is that when you think of lending something to someone, you think of them giving you interest for what was given. What's being implied by the fact that the person is begging to borrow from you is that you're not going to get any interest. You're not going to get any return off of this investment because this person has to beg for it.
Yeah.
And so it's all one sentence. It is implied that when you're helping someone, that it is being borrowed.
Yeah.
In one sense. But he's saying don't refuse to the one who has to beg for it, for that borrow, implying they cannot give you, so
they can't give it back.
They can't give it back, or they can't give it back with interest.
Right.
And so he's kind of like turning the tables a bit on this last one. It's like, but it is all the same. It's like, but he's switching it because the person begging or asking you for help isn't necessarily an enemy, someone suing you, someone insulting you. But it could be looked that way, is if someone could view someone asking you for a resource for help.
Yeah.
And there's, that there is no personal benefit for you to do this, you could categorize them in the same category of they're in no way benefiting you. So this is kind of clicking with me now. So it's like someone insults you, you don't insult them back. You let them insult you again if that's the route that they want to go. Someone sues you, you don't sue them back. Instead, you go out of your way to settle it. You go beyond. Someone forces you to go a mile with them, be kind and gracious and be helpful and go with them a second mile, even though nothing would require you to do so. And then if someone needs your help, even if they can't help you back, help them anyway.
Yeah.
So it's the same category. It's the same thing that's occurring here. And I could see even culturally, it's different for us in our Western culture because of the different influences that we've had in our Western culture that we see this differently. But I feel like culturally someone is seeing this last one here in that same vein of people who want to borrow from me and can't help me back.
Yeah.
That's just as much as a nuisance as the person who insults me.
Yeah.
Because you're insulting me by not paying me back. You're insulting me.
Right.
You're attacking me by not giving me interest back. You're... I don't know that we think that way necessarily in our Western culture. Maybe some people do. I can see...
Sure.
I mean, especially like more business-minded people, more entrepreneur-minded people, sometimes are insulted by such an idea. Not everybody, I'm just saying some people. But a lot of times in the West, a lot of people, I'll call it common grace, tend to want to give and to help those that are in need and have a, what's the word for that? I don't even mean humanitarian needs isn't what I'm thinking of. There's a very simple word that has just lost my mind.
I can't think of it either.
Charitable, charity,
Okay.
or given to charity, I think maybe is the way we could say that. And they know they're not going to get anything back for it.
Right.
And so I think that's why maybe this one doesn't quite hit as much because we kind of have a culture where that's, Christian or not, that is a very much respected thing in our culture. That's a very much like, yeah, we should do that. But that's not true of every culture. Not every culture has had that kind of influence of thinking that is a positive thing. So I can see that as being in the list of. And on top of it all, your neighbor who needed help that one time that is never going to help you back or be able to pay you back for it. Yeah, keep doing that. Like, go help him again. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for finding that. That kind of helps.
Yeah,
I was like on the edge of it, and I was like, I know this makes sense, and I feel like it's kind of right there out of reach. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you can see now. Gosh, it's crazy once you like start digging to this that all of this was from like one teaching.
Yeah,
like
it's just
all
fun.
of these things like back to back to back to back. I had something on this that I was going to kind of bring up because it does. I feel like this more than anything is more easily applicable to our culture and our life. I feel like it's no secret that like homelessness is a big deal over here on the West Coast. I'm not sure how that looks for you where you're at, but it is a big deal over here. And I know me personally that this tends to be a really tough one because I walk by or drive by someone and just assume they're just out looking for money. They're going to go use it on something else, right? Like I tend to just have that ingrained in my head and I don't give it a second thought. And I read a verse like this and it makes me have to pause and reconsider that to a certain extent. And once again, this is all nuance. But I read this and I was going to share this it really hit me between the eyes, man. Like I don't know what to do with it other than repent.
Hmm.
um, so there's this guy. He 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 was kind of wrestling with this passage as well, and he went and he talked to, because once again, all the same things, like, hey, these people, they're just going to go misuse this money. I'm not really helping. I'm perpetuating the problem. And he went and he talked to a guy who runs a homeless shelter, and giving his concerns over this, and the man responded with, we should primarily be giving to the things that will get people off the street rather than things which keep people on the street.
Hmm.
So his response was, we should be wise with our money, and we should be giving towards helping people get off the street rather than just keeping them there. So giving
Hmm.
them money to get somewhere, or giving towards shelters to help. Like, I mean, he was perpetuating that idea, which I was like, yep, I would agree with that. Like,
Right.
that's great. But the second part of the statement was, as long as we're not actually dressing up cynicism and calling it wisdom.
Mm.
I was like, oh my gosh, that is me.
Oh.
He said we should primarily give to the things which get people off the street rather than what keeps them on the street, as long as we're not actually dressing up cynicism and calling it wisdom.
Mm. Mm.
And that forces me to reevaluate my stance on this. And I'm just kind of, this is a podcast about our journey, and this is just
Yeah.
something that I've had to kind of check and reevaluate, and just be like, instead of my natural, just like ingrained response of, yeah, I don't need to help that person,
Right.
maybe I actually do potentially. And instead of
Right.
the wisdom that I have carved out and said, no, this is wise to use my money,
Hmm.
or to not give my money. It's wise because this is a bad, quote, investment, or they're going to go do X, Y,
Hmm.
and Z. When I look at this command, I'm expecting return out of my investment, right? Like, I'm expecting to get something out of this
Right.
deposit. Maybe not
Right.
monetarily, but how I
Right.
feel, what it does for this person. And I'm expecting that return. And
Right.
Jesus is saying, give without the return.
No, this is really
Give
good.
without an expectation of a return. And I was like, it just hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, this,
Right.
I've gotten this wrong.
Right. Right. Okay, this is really good. So, like, there is so much truth in understanding that there is right ways of helping people.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's wrong ways of helping people. Right? Like we referenced, perpetuating someone's homelessness or addiction
Right.
does not help someone. What cynicism does is it stereotypes everyone. It assumes no one actually wants help. And even worse, maybe to the person who knows that wisdom says, I'm going to perpetuate it if I do it this way, is probably the same person who isn't doing anything to help
Yeah. Yeah.
or trying to help.
Right.
And so it's a hard thing, but the road of cynicism when it comes to those that cannot offer you anything in return, is there a lot of people that don't want help and they just want you to help perpetuate something? Yeah, there's a lot of that. But that doesn't give you a pass on helping people. or trying to help the person who currently doesn't think they really want the help that they need.
Yeah.
And I wrestle with this so heavily.
Yeah.
Different situations, different people, cause for different situations, but I know what you're talking about. There is the one side, right? We got to do the right thing to help the right person in the right situation. We can't just throw money at everything and think, oh, that'll solve it.
Right.
But cynicism says everybody's got an angle. Nobody wants help. Everybody's homeless on purpose, right? Like they're only that way because they want to be. It said all the different things someone could say about a situation. But then there's all the legitimate situations and all the things that have happened to people and people's inability to get work. And then this happens and that happens in this situation. And now they're in this situation. And so, or even in the extreme situations of addiction, people that don't want to be in that world of addiction and how they're going to get help from that. And so we must not be cynical and like, well, because they're just a stain in our city and they just, whatever. Well, but what have you done?
Yeah.
To the one begging for bread? What have you done to help, to truly try to help by God's grace? One of the reasons why you probably haven't is because you're not going to get anything out of it personally.
Yeah.
They're never going to be returned the favor. More than likely. But that's not why you do it.
Right.
Whether it's the insults, whether it's the unjust fairness of people making you go with them or being unjustly sued or all this. How dare we view those that are down and out the same way we would view the others? Just something else in my way. Something else just.
Yeah. Our as a follower of Jesus, our response should be not of cynicism, but of generosity and a willingness to step in, right?
Yeah.
Because I would argue there is wisdom and nuance to this, but if you look just at face value, Jesus doesn't even give room for that in this teaching. It's just like, if it happens, do it, right? So like, there's part of me that just wonders to what extent even the wisdom that I'm saying should be wisdom is actually the right way to look at it. But regardless, I think we've kind of captured the this portion of it, and I think at the end of the day, if we could surmise it, it would be he is calling us to repay evil with good, and he is calling us to be generous and to go above and beyond for our enemies, for those who are against us, and for those who we would consider beneath us. For those who can't do anything back in return for us, we give.
Another way to say this would be, not only do I not want you to retaliate, I want you to love them.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Well, join us next time
for another exciting adventure down difficult teachings from Jesus. Well done.
I know we've gone over time, but if you just think about this being played out, what a testimony, what a witness that is of someone doing that, right?
Yes.
And that's the whole point. Jesus is saying, my kingdom is not like yours. How I see things is not like you.
Right.
How I want you to look and act is not the way you would normally expect. Like this is supposed to be different. This is supposed to be difficult because it goes against what we would naturally think or see the world, right?
Yes. Yep. That's good. Whew. Well,
Well,
looking forward to the next one next week. And I want to repeat something. We're not just saying these things so we can, in this moment, have this conversation or listen to this conversation and be like, oh man, that is difficult. No, we got to ponder on these things and ask God about these things and have him
yeah,
change where we're at
right.
and be very moldable to being an apprentice of Jesus. Because as apprentices, we're not above our master. And so
Right.
this is what Jesus demonstrates and teaches. Then we're supposed to as well.
Yeah.
So don't give up. Don't surrender on these issues. Dive in deeper and hang on tight because the Lord's going to take you to some wild places.
Yes. Yes.
All right, guys. We'll see you in the next one.
See you.